And then I'm going to actually read you the allegations that essentially the state has against against Quadajah Johnson in the alleged killing of Romeca Blackmon. And I think it's important to read this, and it also helps me be able to tell my story. It's a lot of sad information coming out of this. I mean, now that I've had time to sit back and actually read this, if you watched my live earlier, that live was okay, but these are actually concrete facts that I've had a chance to digest that I did not know prior to that live. So give me a second. Okay, so I'll start out with this document first, and we're gonna get to all of that. And I may not answer your questions because for the sake of timing, I do have to write something for the 4 o'clock show. But okay, so in this case, DMV, victim being Romeca, D being Johnson. So I'll just alternate the names. So Quadajah Johnson and Romeca Blackmon each have a child with witness 1 in this case. All 3 parties got into a dispute near a school. Johnson threatened Blackmon multiple times in front of witnesses. Johnson then retrieved a handgun, shot Blackmon multiple times in front of witnesses. This is according to the Cook County, this was filed for the murder charge, the first degree murder charge. So again, Johnson threatened Blackmon multiple times in front of witnesses. Johnson then retrieved a handgun, shot Blackmon multiple times in front of witnesses, and then we know, sadly, Blackmon died. Johnson murdered Blackmon after Blackmon had just dropped her child off at school. Johnson celebrated the murder immediately after. Johnson was undeterred by the presence of witnesses, public setting, broad light near a school, and near many children. Multiple civilian calls to 911 before and after the murder. It basically goes on to say that she deserves to be held behind bars because clearly she doesn't care about the harm, and based on the previous circumstance that happened, nothing would stop her, is essentially what it says. Now this is what the court is alleging. Now this is a 3-page document of all of the facts from the court. So it says, witness 1 has a 6-month-old child in common with Johnson, as well as a 6-year-old child in common with Blackmon, the victim. In December 2024, the defendant sought a stalking no contact order against the victim, alleging that the victim made verbal threats to the defendant through the defendant's family members. The defendant in this case, let's go back. So in December of 2024, the defendant sought a stalking no contact order against, so that means that Johnson sought that stalking no contact order against Romeca, alleging that Romeca made that verbal threats to her through Johnson's family members. Johnson did not allege that Blackmon committed any acts of violence against her. The order of protection was granted in July of 2025, but was never served on the victim. I think I kind of mentioned that a little bit earlier. On September 8th of 2025, just before 8:30 in the morning, witness 1 drove his black Mercedes SUV from his home located on South State Street. So this is the father in all of this, to the location of 20 West Cermak. Johnson was seated in the front passenger seat, and the 6-month-old child was in the rear. So the child was present through all of this, Johnson's child, in the removable car seat of the Mercedes. The defendant was dressed in a black jacket, that being Johnson, with green leggings. The father double parked his Mercedes on Cermak 2 car lengths in front of Johnson's black Chevy Cruze. Johnson and the father of their child then removed their child from the Mercedes and walked towards Johnson's Chevy and loaded the child into Johnson's vehicle. At approximately the same time, the victim drove her white Kia sedan to a school located nearby. The victim was dressed in a light pink outfit. She dropped her 6-year-old son off at school and then drove to where Johnson's Chevy and the father of their child was parked on Cermak. Romeca double parked her Kia on Cermak behind the father's Mercedes and got out. while Johnson stood outside of her car. At this time, witness 2, who does not know any of the parties, so a witness on the street, drove past Romeca, Johnson, and the father, observing that Johnson and Romeca standing in the street arguing, but unable to hear exactly what was being said. This person observed the father standing in between the two ladies with his arms extended, and then observed the Johnson, she's D in this case, the defendant, Johnson away. So witness 2 observed the father push Johnson away from Romeca, while that doesn't make sense on that file. While Romeca, unarmed, stood stationary with her arms crossed across her chest. Minutes later, another witness on an eastbound bus that drove past saw this argument again between Johnson and Romeca. She observed, and bus video captured, Romeca and the father standing in the open driver's door area of Romeca's Kia. At this time, this witness was walking east on Cermak, approaching State Street. This witness got out the bus, walked across Cermak, and stood under the CTA Green Line stop near another witness. Those two witnesses also don't know any of the parties involved. They observed the father standing in between the two mothers, Johnson and Romeca. They observed Johnson walk towards the driver's door of the Kia, standing in the threshold of the driver's door with the father standing immediately outside of the driver's door. Johnson was standing on the sidewalk arguing with Romeca. Another witness observed the father strike Romeca by repeatedly swinging the driver's door of the Kia closed on her. Another witness called 911 reported that the father had struck Romeca multiple times with the car door. After her 911 call, Romeca entered her car. After her 911 call, she entered her car. But two witnesses then observed Johnson approach Romeca's car and heard Johnson making threats towards Romeca. Another witness walked closer to the incident at this time. That person observed Romeca exit the Kia, and when she did, observed the father approach Romeca from behind and place her in a chokehold with his right arm while striking her with his left. This is hard to listen to because this is some acts of domestic violence here as well. This witness observed Romeca unarmed with her hands in the air trying to break free from the father's grasp. A witness heard Johnson make threats to shoot Romeca and heard the father tell Romeca that Johnson had a gun. Johnson then went to her vehicle, was observed by another witness retrieving a handgun and then standing on the sidewalk. The victim was able to break free from the father's hold and took steps away from Johnson as observed by another witness. That witness observed Johnson put her handgun at Romeca, walked toward Romeca, and then fired multiple times at her with a pause between the first shot and the subsequent shots. This witness had just turned to walk away when he heard, this is another witness, a gunshot, a pause, followed by two more gunshots. He looked toward the direction of the gunshots and observed the defendant holding a black handgun in her right hand. Romeca was struck multiple times and collapsed. Another witness, two witnesses moved Romeca's body and moved her slightly west. I guess she must have fallen into traffic. That person then called 911 and reported that Johnson shot Romeca and observed the father and Johnson fist bump one another afterwards. Officers arrived and observed that Johnson was unresponsive, unarmed, and laying in a pool of blood. On scene and covered in blood, Johnson was also on the scene and had blood on her. So the father had blood on him, Johnson had blood on her. Romeca was transported to the hospital and pronounced dead shortly thereafter. Johnson was positively identified as the shooter. Johnson detained and admitted to the shooting. From her Chevy, officers recovered a loaded 9mm handgun. Evidence techs processed the scene, recovering 3 spent shell casings. Ballistics analysis revealed that all 3 of those spent shell casings were fired from Johnson's firearm recovered from the Chevy. This is crazy. Johnson refused medical attention, was transported to the police station where she claimed self-defense and acknowledge that this was the first time. Listen to this. Please, 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 please. If you don't hear nothing else I say, listen to this. This is insane. And this is why you don't get caught up. And why I made my statement earlier about not getting caught up in no mess. Does anybody know Carlos's last name? You guys keep putting that person in there. Who is Carlos in this case? You guys keep saying it. I want to repeat this last part. I just emailed, because you guys asked about Carlos. I just emailed to find out if he's been charged or will be facing charges. I'll have more to come on that. I want to read this last part again because it's very important. Okay. Johnson refused medical attention, was transported to the police station where she claimed self-defense and acknowledged that this was the first time. So this is all fueled by what? If this is the first time she had ever seen Blackmon in person. Johnson did have a valid FOID card and CCL at the time of the shooting. On background, she had had some other run-ins with the law. One run-in on record. Again, Johnson refused medical attention, was transported to the police station where she claimed self-defense and acknowledged this was the first time she had ever seen the victim in person. I don't know what you guys think about that, but I think that is the most awful thing I've ever heard. So you claim this person has threatened you through people. You've never seen them before in person. And why would you shoot them? Why would you feel emboldened enough to shoot them? That's troubling. I don't know how you guys feel about it, but I feel like that's troubling. Very troubling. And I pray that my 3-year-old daughter understands how important it is to love yourself, to not get caught up with no guys that's gonna coerce you or influence your mind to do something stupid. And if you see signs of bullcrap, to get out of it. That's my prayer. And men too got to do better. That's horrible. What would be your basis of shooting and killing somebody you ain't never even seen before, and they didn't have a gun? I don't know. All right. I appreciate you guys tuning in. More to come on Fox 32 at 4. I will post the story. I'm about to listen to the sound. Yes, and I mentioned that if you want to go back and watch this later, I mentioned that order of protection at the top of this when I first started this. That is part of this. She said the order of protection was put in place. She ordered for it to be put in place December 2024 because Johnson alleges that Romeca threatened her through Johnson's family members. She never directly threatened her. Keep that in mind. Also went on to say she had never... This was the first time she saw her in person when she pulled the trigger. Just want to put that out there. Thank you so much for tuning in. More stories to come. And, you can formulate your opinions based on what this says. I just try to give the facts. And the facts remain that we need to instill more self-esteem and pride into our women in the world. And clearly there are some failures that went on here. I don't know what exactly. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a psychologist, but something went wrong here. And now 3 children that we know of, because I don't know if The father has more children, but we know Romeca has a son that is left behind. Johnson is currently pregnant and had a 6-month-old at the time of the shooting. 3 children are without moms. And possibly we don't know what's going to happen with dad. So this is just a failure all the way around. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll make sure to post my updates here throughout the day.
The morning of the court appearance arrived with a sense of anticipation that had been building for days. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had already formed. Reporters adjusting their cameras, onlookers whispering theories, and everyone waiting for a glimpse of the moment they had been talking about. When Quadajah Johnson, known as Holly, was finally brought in, the atmosphere shifted instantly. Conversations quieted, cameras focused, and all attention locked onto her as she stepped into a reality that had been unfolding without her public presence until now. Inside the courtroom, the energy felt even heavier. Every seat was filled, and the silence carried a kind of tension that words couldn't quite describe. Holly took her place, her expression controlled, giving little away as the proceedings began. For many watching, this was the first real moment to observe her closely, to see how she carried herself under the weight of everything that had happened. It wasn't just about the case anymore. It felt personal, emotional, and deeply real. As the legal process started to move forward, the usual rhythm of a courtroom began to take shape. Lawyers spoke, documents were referenced, and the judge maintained order. Yet beneath that structure, there was a sense that something more was about to unfold. People glanced around, as if expecting an interruption, a shift, something that would break the calm surface of the proceedings. The focus remained on Holly, but there were other figures in the room, quietly drawing attention. Family members seated behind her, watching every moment unfold. Their presence added another layer to the scene, reminding everyone that this case extended beyond legal arguments into real lives and relationships. And as you watch this moment unfold, don't forget to like and subscribe, because what happens next inside that courtroom will catch everyone completely off guard. As the hearing continued, the focus slowly began to shift from the front of the courtroom to the rows behind, where family members sat quietly observing every word and movement. Among them was Holly's father, a figure who had remained mostly unnoticed at first. He sat still, eyes fixed ahead, his expression unreadable, but there was something about his presence that began to draw subtle attention. People nearby exchanged glances, sensing a tension that hadn't yet been expressed. At the front, the legal process moved forward in its usual rhythm. Attorneys spoke with measured tones, presenting arguments and responding carefully, while the judge maintained control over the proceedings. Everything appeared structured, predictable even. But beneath that calm surface, something felt different, like a moment waiting to happen. Then, without warning, that moment arrived. Holly's father suddenly broke the stillness in a way no one expected. Whether it was something he said, a reaction he couldn't hold back, or an action that disrupted the courtroom's order, it was enough to instantly shift the entire atmosphere. Heads turned, whispers spread, and the quiet control of the room fractured in seconds. The reaction was immediate and mixed. Some people looked stunned, unsure of how to process what they had just witnessed. Others seemed deeply affected, recognizing the emotional weight behind the moment. Even those who had been focused solely on the legal arguments couldn't ignore what had just unfolded. At the center of it all remained Quadajah Johnson, Holly, whose connection to that moment made it impossible to separate the personal from the legal. The courtroom was no longer just a place of procedure. It had become a space where emotions broke through in real time. And if you're following this story closely, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because what happens after this moment will have a ripple effect on everything that comes next. The moment didn't fade when the courtroom regained its composure. It lingered, hanging in the air long after Holly's father had been quieted. Even as the judge restored order and proceedings resumed, the atmosphere had shifted in a way that couldn't be undone. Every word spoken afterward carried a different weight, as if everyone in the room was still processing what they had just witnessed. Attorneys attempted to move forward, returning to their arguments with measured focus, but it was clear that something had changed. The structure of the courtroom remained intact, yet the emotional tone had deepened. Observers leaned in more closely now, watching not just for legal points, but for reactions, for signs of how that moment might influence everything else. At the center, Quadajah Johnson, Holly, remained composed, but the connection between her and what had just happened was impossible to ignore. Some in the room glanced toward her, trying to read her expression, wondering what she might be feeling in that moment. Was she affected by her father's actions, or was she focused entirely on the legal battle unfolding in front of her? No one could say for certain, and that uncertainty only added to the tension. Outside the courtroom, news of the incident spread rapidly. Reports began to circulate, each one describing the moment in slightly different ways, but all emphasizing its unexpected nature. Social media lit up with reactions, with people debating what it meant and whether it would have any impact on the case itself. Some saw it as a powerful emotional moment, while others questioned whether it crossed a line within the courtroom setting. The story was no longer just about legal arguments. It had become something more layered, something shaped by human emotion and public perception. And as you continue to follow this unfolding story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, because what comes next could reveal whether that moment was just a brief disruption, or something that will influence the case moving forward. As the proceedings continued, it became clear that the moment involving Holly's father had done more than interrupt the courtroom. It had shifted the way everything was being perceived. Even as the judge maintained order and guided the case forward, there was an underlying tension that hadn't been there before. Every statement, every reaction, now carried a little more weight, as if everyone was aware that something personal had broken through the formal structure of the courtroom. Legal teams adjusted quickly, returning their focus to the case, but even their tone seemed more measured. Arguments were delivered carefully, with an awareness that the emotional atmosphere could not be ignored. Some observers began to wonder whether that moment might indirectly influence how things unfolded, not in terms of evidence, but in how the situation was being interpreted by those watching closely. At the center of it all remained Quadajah Johnson, Holly, whose presence now carried an added layer of attention. People weren't just watching the case anymore. They were watching her. Her reactions, her stillness, her connection to everything that had just occurred. The courtroom had become more than a legal setting. It felt like a space where every small detail mattered. Beyond the courtroom, the story continued to grow. News outlets picked up the moment, and social media discussions intensified. Some people expressed sympathy, seeing the incident as a reflection of the emotional strain surrounding the case. Others viewed it differently, questioning whether it was appropriate within such a serious setting. The divide in opinion only added to the complexity of the narrative. Meanwhile, the legal process moved forward, steady and methodical, focused on facts and procedure. That contrast between the emotional reaction in the courtroom and the structured pace of the legal system became one of the most striking aspects of the story. And as you stay with this unfolding case, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because the final chapter will bring everything together and leave you thinking about what truly matters in moments like these. As the hearing began to wind down, the weight of everything that had happened settled over the courtroom in a way that was impossible to ignore. What started as a routine appearance had transformed into something far more complex, shaped not only by legal arguments, but by a deeply human moment that no one had anticipated. The presence of Quadajah Johnson, known as Holly, remained at the center, but the story had grown beyond just her. It now included the emotions, reactions, and relationships that had surfaced in real time. The courtroom gradually returned to its formal rhythm, but the memory of that unexpected moment lingered. People filed out quietly, many still processing what they had seen and heard. Some exchanged thoughts in hushed conversations, while others remained silent, reflecting on how quickly everything had changed. It was clear that this wasn't just another step in a legal process. It was a moment that would stay with everyone who witnessed it. Outside, the story continued to spread, gaining attention far beyond the courthouse walls. Discussions unfolded across platforms, with people sharing their interpretations and reactions. Some focused on the emotional weight of Holly's father's actions, seeing it as a reflection of the strain the situation had placed on the family. Others viewed it through a different lens, questioning how such a moment fits into a setting defined by structure and order. Meanwhile, the case itself moved forward, steady and deliberate, guided by evidence and procedure. The contrast between that controlled pace and the raw emotion seen in the courtroom became one of the most defining elements of the story. It served as a reminder that behind every case are real people, real relationships, and moments that can't always be contained within formal boundaries. In the end, this wasn't just about a court appearance. It was about how quickly a single moment can reshape an entire narrative. And if you followed this story from beginning to end, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, because stories like this remind us that sometimes the most unexpected moments leave the strongest impact.